So we talked about in that other video about the paradigms and how they're at war with each other. If we sort of forget about, research as a battle just between research and opinion, or between, the North and the South and all this sort of stuff, and think about within the Western tradition itself, research is also a battle that you would think. So we talked about in the paradigms before about someone like Jordan Peterson, who takes a really strident sort of positivist line where he says, things like, what is it in that book? It's like lobsters have particular social structures, therefore humans do as well. So a lot of what he explains, a lot of the things that he thinks human behavior stems from is biological in origin, that it's not sort of culturally determined. But I don't know that necessarily this is a worthy battle either. I think sometimes people are talking across purposes. I think sometimes people are arguing a point that they shouldn't argue. And if you go to YouTube and watch Peterson's debate with Zizek, and you can see Peterson just be absolutely outclassed. And it's not because he's an idiot. He knows clinical psychology really well, but it's because he is arguing from a particular paradigmatic position with something completely different, like with a system of values or a sense of ethics or a philosophical mythological base. So I've got an example in here. I'm not sure if this sound will play for us. Let's try.
It seems to me that there's sort of two versions of you that are floating around. The one is the scholarly work that you've done over your career.
Yeah.
And then there's this online version. I mean, do you feel split at all right now?
Fragmented is more accurate than just split. The political split that you're talking about is the humanities at the universities have become intolerably corrupt. They don't teach people to read. They don't teach them to think. They don't teach them to speak. They don't have them read great works. They've become indoctrination factories for a social justice ideology.
I have a personal theory that I wanted to run by you, and it is that college right now and universities are their own ecosystem, and that professors and students both have been sort of trapped in a war of ideas, as you put it, that keeps escalating. But that once you walk outside the gates of that university, that it seems very contained to the university. What I don't see is sort of this sort of veering towards apocalypse.
Oh yeah, it's spreading into HR, into corporations throughout the U.S. through HR departments, very, very rapidly.
In what ways, though? In a way that is not sort of like, hey,
Well,
how about you not grab like the ass of your coworker?
NBC is regulating hugging, right? And not only that,
do you not feel like that was out of a response of these sorts of stories, like of generations of men sort of taking advantage?
It's not easy to solve a complicated problem, and like ready-made ideological solutions don't work. They just make it worse.
But come on, that's just like a maxim. You're not actually addressing the question, which is like, isn't there harm that is trying to be solved?
There isn't a question. There's a set of questions, and no one's posing them. Here's a question: can men and women work together in the workplace?
Yes, I do it.
How do you know?
Because I work with a lot of women.
Right. Well, it's been happening for 40 years? And things are deteriorating very rapidly at the moment in terms of the relationships between men and women. Is there sexual harassment in the workplace? Yes. Should it stop? That'd be good. Will it? Well, not at the moment it won't, because we don't know what the rules are.
Do you think men and women can work in the workplace together?
I don't know.
Without sexual harassment?
We'll see.
We'll see. How many years will it take for men and women working in the workplace together?
More than 40.
To get a sense.
We don't know what the rules are. Like what? Here's a rule.
Don't
How about no makeup in the workplace?
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
No.
It's not?
No.
Well, what is it then? What's the purpose of makeup?
Some people would like to just put on makeup.
Why?
I don't know why.
Why do you make your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on your cheeks? Same reason.
I mean, look.
How about high heels?
What are they for? What about high heels?
What about them? They're there to exaggerate sexual attractiveness. That's what high heels do. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that that is what they're doing, and that is what they're doing.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think that.
So the problem... What? Yeah, so I think the problem is not so much... I use that video as an example, not because like, oh, haha, we disagree with Jordan Peterson. the problem I have with when he's most accurate in that video is when he identifies himself as fragmented. The guy's like, do you see a split in your identity or in your sort of your political presentation of self and your, intellectual self or whatever it is? And Peterson, I think he's this like darling of the alt-right or whatever, or of incels or whoever, whatever community it is out there that thinks that he's just so great.
Lobsters.
And I think that he says a lot of things that speak to people because they're like, oh, this is really important, make your bed before you go out. And he gives a lot of really simple wine. He gives a lot of simple rules. It'll be caught on the bloody video, so who cares now? This has now just become just a full-on YouTube video. We're YouTubers now. Next it'll be actual video on us having this conversation.
Fuck that.
So I think that when he identifies himself as fragmented, I think there's a legitimate thing there because for me, the fragmentation is paradigmatic. He is a clinical psychologist. He thinks that there are rules, and that's how you identify him as a positivist because he's like, what are the rules? What are the rules of engagement here? And when he offers reasons why people wear makeup to work, he's like, because it exaggerates sexual attractiveness, because your cheeks blush, it's simulating this and that. But what he's talking about are cultural practices. And a post-structuralist will say, well, actually, what's the meaning that someone gives to wearing lipstick to the workplace? Black lipstick doesn't simulate sex. Right. It simulates death.
Right. And I think it comes back to, and this is one of my issues with Jordan Peterson. Like we said before, context matters. And you don't only wear lipstick for a sexual reason. You don't only wear high heels for a sexual reason. It could be power. If we look at it in power terms, if you're a woman and you're shorter than the men you work with, and you're going into a business meeting where you're in control, it literally adds height to put you symbolically at the same level.
So, and
that's not sexual. That's my issue with him. It's just like, this is the only reason that anyone could possibly have for wearing makeup or high heels or whatever other rubbish he was doing.
Sure. And so what you've identified are alternative paradigmatic ways of understanding it.
Right.
Maybe a critical understanding about power, maybe a post-structural understanding about particular meanings that you're constructing in that environment. But I am sure that Jordan Peterson would probably say, sure, there are maybe people are using that situation to exploit power. But then he would fall back on a biological explanation,
right,
which is species competing for dominance or something like that. Do you know what I mean? But then if a woman were to wear that into work, then, I mean, how does that track with... I don't want to get into it because, it's
a whole different video.
It's a whole different thing, and also I'm not outright rejecting the idea that there are biological elements that not predetermined, but that influence aspects of our behavior.
Of course.
But to ignore cultural things is just silly. And it's also the point I'm making about research paradigms seeming like they're at war with each other.
Right.
They do different things. When you enter into the terrain of power and values, so my guy, Bent Flubier, who draws on Foucault and Aristotle to kind of fuse together this idea of virtue, and suggests that the social sciences' strength comes from talking about virtue and power and what should we do and what can we do in a given situation. That is something for which there is no answer that comes from, biology. What should we do is an ethical and political question.
Right.
So the paradigms have different values in different contexts, is kind of my point. So John Hattie is a researcher from the Melbourne Graduate School of Education. Probably in education policy terms, he's the most influential academic there is in education. And in an interview about 2 years ago, he said, I am a measurement researcher, I'm a statistician, I am not a theoretician, so I haven't written a lot of theory. What Hattie did, he wrote this book, Visible Learning. It is one of the most popular books on what to do in a classroom out there. And what he did was do he pulled up every quantitative study he could find, aggregated them together. It's called a meta-analysis. And so it was like 800 studies, and he's like, here is the effect size of each thing you try in the classroom. Anything with 0.4 or less is not worth trying. Only do the 0.4 things. So massive quantitative study. He's like, this is what works in the classroom. Obviously, a particular paradigm that he's using. And when he makes a statement like this, I'm a measurement researcher, I'm a statistician, I am not a theoretician, I find that problematic. Now, asterisk here, John Hattie is still a very smart guy, you know what I mean? And I caveat this because he follows up later on. I'll give him some credit in a second. But it's fun to sort of burlesque it for this conversation. So even the use of statistics implies a philosophical frame, right? Even if you're saying, I am not a theoretician because I use numbers to do everything, the use of numbers implies a theoretical framework. Right. Scott Eacott, really cool guy from UNSW, says real educational environments are very noisy places in a statistical sense. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in classrooms statistically. And a researcher who relies on statistics, it's their job often to amplify signal so it stands out from the noise, right? This is, you talk about that with presidential elections as well. Nate Silver was really interesting going into the Trump election where he said, look, I'm giving a stronger chance to Trump than everybody else. I don't think Trump will win, but he still gave Trump a stronger chance than Hillary. And everyone was so shocked when Hillary won. Right. And I'm just like, actually, well, so many times out of 100, Trump does win those elections if you run those simulations. Trump won, not Hillary. That's what I'm saying. He gave Trump a stronger chance than Hillary. Not a stronger chance than Hillary. He gave Trump a stronger chance than anyone else gave Trump. But still, he thought Hillary would win. What happened was Trump wins, and Nate Silver's point is, sure, but you are running simulations of an election to gauge a probability. There's not a 0% chance of Trump winning. So however many times out of 100, Trump wins, and he did. And the same thing happened in the last federal election in Australia. We had statistical herding around particular results in the polls for the 3 or 4 years leading up to the election. What we didn't realise is that, of course, there was statistical stuff going on there. There were choices being made in that particular research approach that distorted the results. Scott gives this really awesome metaphor. He's like a personal shopper who selects trousers for customers on the basis of their height rather than their inside leg measurement is making a category error. But there's a close correlation between the two, and one might expect the trousers to fit on a few occasions. Making the selection, so trouser size, based on the length of the customer's surname is a larger category error. There's no obvious correlation between the two, and the fit wouldn't be expected to be better than random. It's still a systematic process. Right. So this is the point about the paradigm wars. You can take a totally systematic process, and Jordan Peterson does take a totally systematic process to understand a particular social phenomenon. But it's a category error because you're trying to analyze, the wearing of makeup or inequalities in the workplace on purely biological terms. Right. As though there is a clinical psychological answer to everything, when in fact you're dealing with a sociological problem. Sociological problems are produced in the space between people. Psychological problems are produced in people's heads. There's an interaction between the two. There's a category error if you're measuring it the wrong way. John Hattie, redemption. Evidence doesn't mean that there should be no theory. He thinks evidence is and should be the most contested word in the business. His view on evidence is that evidence is interpreted. It's interpreted through a lens, and that lens is theory. Theory dominates. Right. I can't remember why I put that slide in there. That was from the thing, so I'll just cut that. So, to wrap it up, I once had a discussion with our friend, whose name I'm not going to mention because he watches all of my YouTube videos. Yeah. And basically we had this conversation about, does time exist? And it wasn't that I was arguing against the existence of time, but I was trying to explain that under a particular construct, like under a particular sort of research paradigm and a particular ontology, you would argue that time is a social construct. That doesn't mean the physical passage of the universe into, entropy, which is the physical thing that we perceive as time. It doesn't mean that doesn't exist. But time, as the passage of that thing, is a human construct. It's a product of language. And it's also a really structuring thing because time is a construct that your parents understood and their parents understood. and you only get it because they understood it. So actually, so much of the way you think is produced before you're even born. And we're kind of trapped by that. That's kind of I guess, up the interpretive end of the spectrum. That's something for you to bear in mind. So culture and all of that sort of super local knowledge, just like the global knowledge, is produced prior to your existence, and it's embedded in your brain and sucked in.
Well, I wish time doesn't exist, because this video is going forever.
This is the end of the video.
Oh. Time no longer exists in this video.
Shut up.